Just as a warning, there will be some spoilers for both Deltarune and Undertale in this video. If you haven't played them yet and want to, please do so before watching this. The TLDR is Deltarune is really fun, definitely give it a shot, you'll have a great time. It's always interesting getting to see the follow-up to a work of a breakout creator, especially someone with as strong an artistic signature as Toby Fox. Undertale was a massive hit that oozed with personality, inspired from classic titles like Earthbound, but with a layer of wit, writing chops, and theming that played with player expectations of what a game was and what a game pays attention to, in a way like few other pieces of interactive entertainment had done so before it. It was a rare game that really felt like it could only exist as a video game, leveraging everything the medium has to offer in order to tell its story. So Deltarune, and Toby Fox, had a difficult act to follow, but at the same time, I was curious to see how much of Undertale was Undertale, and how much was Toby Fox as an artist. To see where the inherent, almost subconscious flourishes of Toby Fox's creativity end, and the intentional choices to make Undertale what it is begin. How would Deltarune differentiate itself from what came before it and carve an identity all its own? This is already a difficult needle to thread, made all the more tricky by the fact that Deltarune is both literally and conceptually Undertale's anagram, so its style and tone stay very much in line with the previous game, to the point that it warns before playing that finishing Undertale is essentially required reading to get the experience from the game Toby Fox is trying to convey. While it would have been a safer bet, and almost certainly tempting for Toby's wallet, to simply make Undertale 2, on first impression, Deltarune does feel like an expansion pack to the prior game, lifting aesthetic, motifs, and entire characters straight from said game, though all is similarly rearranged as the title. Probably the biggest differentiator is the combat system. Aside from having one of the catchiest battle themes of any RPG I've ever played, Deltarune shifts up from a first-person, one-man party system of Undertale to a third-person, multi-party setup. While you're always present as Chris, you'll be joined by tough-as-nail tsundere Susie and pure-hearted soft boy Ralsei for the majority of your playthrough, with a couple of other characters subbing in and out as the story progresses. Combat works similarly to Undertale, with enemy attacks each being Toho-style microgames of bullet dodging, and the kill spare mechanic from Undertale persists, but having to juggle multiple party members' health and abilities to either damage or pacify opponents adds a bit of extra complexity, if only barely so. The addition of a mercy meter to track how well your actions are working on opponents is nice too. There is a bit more variety in Deltarune though, from having to throw other party members to knock a crown off a boss, to coaxing a string of enemies to all be the same color. Encounters often become little minigames of their own. One of the most interesting elements early on was having to warn the enemies of Susie's violent intentions if you were playing pacifist, though this mechanic never expands beyond just dumping your first turn into it. It makes sense since the mechanic is dropped halfway through Chapter 1 as Susie falls back in line with your choices, but I was initially excited to see how it may have expanded throughout the whole game. Random battles have been swapped out for being able to see enemies on the map, which is nice, especially since you can't run from a battle once engaged. But for a pacifist run, battles can start to feel a little repetitive since every enemy uses the same simple technique to pacify, and battles gain you no XP and only a minor amount of money that you quickly find yourself in excess of regardless, so they can feel a bit superfluous. This is partially rectified in Chapter 2 with a recruiting system, where pacifying a certain amount of the same enemy will bring them back to the starting area, but to anyone not massively enthused with dodging bullets, the combat is serviceable but sparse in options. For all of the amazing writing, characters, and general personality of Undertale, my favorite part of that game was without question the metagame going on underneath. I think for anyone playing that game blind and trying to reset after their first go with the Toriel fight only to be actively called out by the game for doing so, immediately catapulted Undertale from being just another quirky indie RPG to a masterclass on examining the player's relationship with the foundational mechanics of video games and how we take those systems for granted, since they usually exist outside the fiction of the game itself. The temptation of the player to test the limits of how much the game was actually able to keep track of what you did versus the now much more active moral responsibility to stay on the straight and narrow and do well by these characters you came to care for was the crux of Undertale's genius to me personally. As much as the capital G gamer in me wanted to push the boundaries, the softie in me could never bring myself to give in to Flowey's goading and willingly delete the happy ending my pacifist run had granted everybody. Deltarune's thematic aims feel a little bit more sophomoric in comparison, with the story of the first two chapters falling back on traditional archetypal characters and tried and true narrative beats. Lots of stuff about friendship, forgiveness, understanding, and compassion. Stuff that would feel right at home in a shonen manga or the like. All well done, don't get me wrong, but nothing that we haven't seen before. Undertale 2, of course, played strongly to these tropes itself, also nailing their execution. But the underlying nature of the game itself, watching and tracking what you were doing, added an extra dimension to all those decisions and further invested you in wanting to actually be the shonen protagonist, lest the game and its denizens chastise you for your moral failings and punish you if you tried to save scum your way out of them. Though judging an entire game's narrative by the first 2 of 7 chapters alone feels a bit short-sighted. The entire time playing through Chapter 1 in 2018, I was just waiting for the other shoe to drop. After the bait and switch with character creation, I was primed for some more meta stuff in the vein of Undertale, but outside a few subtle nods to that scene, Chapter 1 of Deltarune plays it entirely straight right up until the very end scene, with Chris ripping the heart, the player, out of themselves and tossing it away in a zombified trance. We don't get much more development on what exactly this means throughout almost anything in Chapter 2, almost like Toby is trying to lull the player into forgetting that ending even happened, until, again, at the very end of Chapter 2, a similar repeat happens, with Chris causing some more damage after freeing themselves from the player. It seems like Deltarune is going to try and make some commentary on the player's relationship to the protagonist in games. While it's understood that a character in a game with their own personality is a separate entity from the player, even though we have complete control over all their actions in-game, this is understood to be a faux distinction, an abstraction that allows the game to work as intended. We aren't literally the protagonist, even though our actions decide their fate, to the point where we can make them act completely antithetical to how they're depicted in the story segments. Deltarune seems to be making this mechanical aspect of games a narrative one, with the good-natured Chris under our control only being an illusion, puppeted by our intent. Once removed, they become someone far darker and much more unhinged. Obviously, this is all speculation on my part, and far from a unique reading of the game so far, but it seems as solid a theory as any. This is definitely the aspect of the game that's keeping me the most invested, though, and is the closest to what entranced me with Undertale. Note that I've only played the pacifist route of Deltarune so far, so how this aspect changes, if it changes at all, by being more violent, I'm not sure. I still can't bring myself to murder anyone in these games. I think I'm probably in the minority though, as most people who love Undertale so much loved the characters first and foremost, especially if the myriad of fan work is any indication. And I think Deltarune delivers on more endearing Toby Fox character writing that propelled Undertale to indie fame that will satisfy and delight anyone who became attached to those characters in the first place. I don't know if anyone in Deltarune so far will ever be as iconic as Sans, though the fandom seems to be taking a particular liking to Spamton, but the game absolutely has moments of character quips that rival the best in Undertale. Queen's "I only play mobile games" line, paired with the perfect amount of pause before delivery, made me burst out laughing harder than probably anything else this year, and that's not even the best joke in the game, I'm just that easily amused. Overall, I'm having a blast with Deltarune so far. If I was Toby Fox, I would have been terrified of the position I've been put into following Undertale. Releasing anything after such a milestone debut is a recipe for fandom backlash. I haven't looked much into the reception of Deltarune, but for me, this is a follow-up worth being proud of. I'm excited to see where the story goes next. And if you need somewhere to go next, check out this video on what's ruining mobile games to see why Queen's joke got me so bad.